Whispers echoed through the velvet-lined pews of the cathedral. Snickers bubbled over crystal champagne flutes at the reception. The fat joke bride. The criminal underworld branded Carmen Bennett with that cruel title when she was traded like defective merchandise to the ruthless Santoro syndicate. Made men assumed her weight made her slow. High society wives mistook her silence for stupidity. But while the city's most dangerous figures laughed at her waistline, Carmen memorized the family ledgers, the hidden secrets, and the darkest sins. By the time the bosses realized the heavy-set girl in the corner was actually pulling the strings, the trap had already snapped shut. She didn't just survive the Mafia world, she broke it. And then she claimed its king. The bridal suite at the Waldorf Astoria smelled heavily of white lilies and unspoken pity. Carmen Bennett stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror, her reflection staring back with a haunting calmness. The dress, a monstrous creation of imported Italian lace and suffocating silk, had been selected by her soon-to-be mother-in-law, a woman whose eyes held all the warmth of a frozen lake. It was a dress designed for a woman half Carmen's size, altered hastily and deliberately tailored to accentuate every curve, every roll, every ounce of flesh that the high society Mafia wives so viciously despised. Carmen was not blind. She was 24 brilliant and possessed an eidetic memory that had made her the silent architect of her father's shipping empire in Boston. But in the eyes of Theo Bennett, her father, she was simply leverage. Her intellect was irrelevant. Her body was a liability. When the Bennett family needed to secure a port treaty with the New York-based Santoro syndicate, Carmen was offered up as the sacrificial lamb. Her groom was Valentino Santoro, 30 years old, carved from violence and old money. He was the heir apparent to the Santoro family. He was also notoriously cruel, fiercely guarded, and completely furious about the arranged marriage. "Suck it in, darling, for heaven's sake," her mother hissed, pulling brutally at the corset strings. "Valentino is a man of certain tastes. The least you can do is try not to embarrass us when you walk down that aisle." Carmen didn't flinch. She let the physical pain of the corset wash over her, cataloguing it the same way she catalogued the offshore bank accounts she managed for her father. The treaty is signed, Mother Carmen replied, her voice smooth and devoid of tremor. "Valentino Santoro is marrying the Boston Docks. He just happens to have to put a ring on my finger to get them." An hour later, the heavy oak doors of St. Patrick's Cathedral swung open. The silence that fell over the congregation was not one of awe, but of barely contained shock. Over 600 guests, capos, politicians, corrupt judges like Harold Pendleton, and dirty union bosses turned to look. Carmen began her walk. The whispers started immediately rustling through the pews like dry leaves in a graveyard. Look at the size of her. Valentino must be planning to suffocate her in her sleep, the fat joke bride. Theo Bennett really sold them a lemon, didn't he? Carmen kept her chin high, her dark eyes fixed on the altar. Standing there was Valentino. In his tailored midnight blue tuxedo, he looked like a dark god of war. His jaw was clenched so tightly, Carmen thought his teeth might shatter. As she reached his side, he didn't offer his hand. He didn't even look at her. "Let's get this over with," Valentino muttered under his breath, his voice a low, gravelly threat meant only for her. The ceremony was a blur of Latin prayers and hollow vows. But the true humiliation began at the reception. The Santoro family had spared no expense, transforming the grand ballroom into a lavish display of power. Yet the bride was treated like a ghost. Valentino abandoned Carmen at the head table the moment the obligatory photographs were taken. He spent the evening at the far side of the room, sipping scotch and leaning intimately close to a stunning razor-thin blonde named Camilla Sterling. Camilla was the daughter of a prominent money launderer, and rumor had it she had been sharing Valentino's bed for the better part of 2 years. Carmen sat alone behind a tower of untouched wedding cake. She didn't cry. She didn't flee to the restroom to break down. Instead, she watched. She watched Valentino's uncle Salvatore Santoro, a man with a perpetually slicked-back widow's peak, slip a thick manila envelope to Councilman Richard Davies near the ice sculpture. She watched the family's chief enforcer argue with a union rep over what looked like shipping manifests. She watched the subtle hierarchies, the hidden glances, the subtle transfers of power that happened in plain sight. They thought she was just a fat girl weeping internally over her handsome, indifferent husband. They had no idea she was a human supercomputer, and she was currently downloading the entire operational structure of the Santoro crime family. That night, in the sprawling, cold expanse of Valentino's Tribeca penthouse, the reality of her new life settled in. Valentino walked through the front door, loosened his tie, and finally looked at her. "You get the master bedroom," he said, coldly pouring himself a drink. "I sleep in the guest suite down the hall. You have a limitless black card, a driver, and absolute freedom to do whatever you want in this city, so long as you don't embarrass my family name. We will attend public functions together. We will smile. And behind closed doors we will not cross paths." Carmen slipped off her high heels, feeling the soft carpet beneath her aching feet. "And Camilla?" she asked quietly. Valentino stopped, his eyes flashing with sudden violent anger. "Don't overstep, Carmen. You are a signature on a peace treaty. Nothing more. Don't expect me to be the devoted husband, and I won't expect you to be the traditional wife." He walked away, the heavy door of his suite clicking shut. Carmen was left alone in the dark, the echoes of the wedding whispers still ringing in her ears. The fat joke bride. She walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the glittering grid of New York City. A slow, dangerous smile crept onto her lips. Valentino Santoro thought he had acquired a passive, useless liability. He was about to find out that he had just let a Trojan horse into the very heart of his empire. 6 months passed. To the outside world, Carmen Santoro was exactly what they expected, a reclusive, quiet woman who spent her days shopping for loose-fitting designer clothes and her evenings dining alone in the massive penthouse. The tabloids occasionally caught unflattering angles of her getting into her chauffeured SUV, juxtaposing her image with paparazzi shots of Valentino, leaving high-end clubs with Camilla Sterling on his arm. The narrative was set. Valentino was the tragic, handsome Mafia prince, shackled to a beast, and Camilla was his true, forbidden love. The foot soldiers mocked Carmen behind her back. The Santoro wives excluded her from their charity galas. But Carmen was far from idle. In the crushing loneliness of her marriage, she found her weapon: information. Valentino was a brilliant tactician on the streets, but he was notoriously old school when it came to his money. He kept physical ledgers in a biometric safe in his home office, a room Carmen was explicitly forbidden to enter. It took her 3 weeks to memorize the sequence of tones the keypad made when Valentino punched in his code. It took her another 2 days to lift his fingerprint from a crystal Scotch glass and replicate it, using a high-grade silicone mold she ordered under a fake name. Every Tuesday and Thursday night when Valentino was working late, which usually meant he was with Camilla or running the docks, Carmen slipped into the office. She didn't just read the ledgers, she devoured them. With her eidetic memory, she cross-referenced the Santoro family's legal front businesses with their illicit cash flows. Within 2 months, Carmen spotted a massive bleeding anomaly. Millions of dollars were being systematically siphoned from the Santoro construction unions. The money was being funneled through shell companies in the Cayman Islands, companies that, according to Valentino's own notes, belonged to a rival Irish faction on the west side. Valentino's ledgers showed him preparing for a bloody turf war, convinced the Irish were bleeding him dry. But Carmen's brilliant mathematical mind caught what Valentino missed. The routing numbers for the offshore accounts didn't match the Irish syndicate's usual laundering channels. They matched a boutique real estate firm in Manhattan, a firm owned by Camilla Sterling's father under the direct protection of Valentino's uncle, Salvatore Santoro. Salvatore was stealing from the family, setting Valentino up to go to war with the Irish and planning to let Valentino take the fall so he could usurp the position of underboss. And Camilla, the beautiful thin mistress, was the spider holding the web together, keeping Valentino distracted, while her family robbed him blind. Carmen had the proof, but she knew presenting it directly to a husband who loathed her would be suicide. He wouldn't believe her. She needed leverage. She needed the perfect moment. That moment arrived on a freezing Tuesday evening in November. Valentino had begrudgingly brought Carmen to a mandatory family dinner at Tavolino's, an exclusive mob-owned Italian restaurant in Little Italy. Uncle Salvatore was there, smiling his greasy paternal smile. Camilla was conspicuously absent, but her perfume lingered on Valentino's jacket. Carmen sat quietly cutting her steak, ignoring the snide comments from Salvatore's wife about her appetite. Valentino was tense. He had been losing shipments at the docks, his men were getting restless, and the stress was carving deep lines into his handsome face. Then, the ambient noise of the restaurant was shattered by the deafening roar of automatic gunfire. The front plate glass windows exploded inward. Screams erupted as patrons dove to the floor. Carmen didn't scream. Her brain, hardwired for crisis management, instantly analyzed the threat. 3 shooters masked, wielding heavy-caliber weapons, entering through the main doors. It was a professional hit. Valentino instantly flipped their heavy oak table, dragging Carmen to the ground behind it. Bullets chewed through the wood, raining splinters over them. "Stay down," Valentino roared, pulling his sidearm. He fired twice over the barricade, taking down one of the shooters, but the other 2 laid down, suppressing fire, advancing on their position. Valentino was pinned. His bodyguards at the front door were already dead. Salvatore had conveniently stepped away to the restroom moments before the attack. It's Salvatore. Carmen thought, her pulse pounding, but her mind crystal clear. He tipped them off. He's making his move tonight. Valentino checked his magazine. He was nearly out. He looked at Carmen, and for the first time in their marriage, she saw genuine fear in his eyes, not for himself, but the grim realization that they were both going to die on this floor. "Listen to me," Valentino growled over the deafening gunfire. "When I stand up and draw their fire, you crawl toward the kitchen swinging doors." "Don't look back, no," Carmen said flatly. Valentino glared at her, stunned by her defiance. "Are you crazy? Move your heavy ass before they flank us. The kitchen exit is a choke point," Carmen said, her voice eerily calm, cutting through the chaos. "They'll have a 4th man waiting in the alley. It's standard for a hit like this. If we go to the kitchen, we die." Valentino stared at her, utterly derailed by her tactical assessment. "How the hell do you know that?" "Because I studied the blueprints of this building 6 months ago, in case I ever needed a fast exit from your family," Carmen lied smoothly. Though she had indeed memorized the blueprints from public city records, there's a Prohibition-era service tunnel beneath the wine cellar. The entrance is behind the northern wall rack. It leads directly to the subway access tunnels. Bullets shattered the chandelier above them, raining glass into Carmen's dark hair. "If you're wrong, we're dead," Valentino shouted. "If I'm wrong, you can shoot me yourself," Carmen shot back. "Throw a glass to the left, we move to the right. On 3. Valentino didn't have time to argue. He grabbed a heavy water pitcher, hurled it across the room to draw the shooter's eyes, and grabbed Carmen's hand. They sprinted, staying low. Carmen, despite her size, moved with surprising agility, driven by pure adrenaline and calculated focus. They crashed into the wine cellar, just as the shooters rounded the flipped table. Valentino slammed the heavy iron-wrought door shut, locking it. They could hear boots pounding down the stairs after them. Northern Wall Carmen barked. Valentino rushed to the massive mahogany wine racks, desperately feeling along the edges. "There's nothing here," Carmen shoved past him. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed a specific bottle of vintage Barolo, twisted it sharply to the left, and pulled. A loud click echoed in the damp cellar, and the entire shelving unit swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow brick tunnel. Valentino looked from the secret door to his wife, his dark eyes wide, with a mixture of shock, awe, and deep confusion. "After you, husband," Carmen said, her breathing heavy but her gaze sharp as a razor. As they plunged into the darkness and the heavy door sealed shut behind them, Valentino realized something earth-shattering. The woman he had treated like a joke, the woman he had discarded and ignored, had just outthought a professional hit squad and saved his life. The safe house in Brooklyn was completely off the grid, a dilapidated warehouse that Valentino kept hidden even from his own uncle. The only light came from a single low-wattage bulb dangling from the ceiling. Valentino sat at a metal table, his tuxedo jacket ruined, wrapping a bandage around a deep graze on his forearm. Carmen stood by the rusted sink, calmly washing the dirt and gunpowder from her hands. The silence between them was thick, heavy, and entirely different from the cold hostility of their penthouse. Valentino watched her. Really watched her. He looked past the curves he had previously mocked, past the soft jawline, and saw the terrifying intelligence burning in her eyes. She hadn't panicked once. While seasoned mobsters had wept and soiled themselves under fire at the restaurant, the fat joke bride had calculated angles and escape routes. "Who are you?" Valentino asked softly. It wasn't an insult this time. It was a demand for the truth. Carmen dried her hands on a rough towel and turned to face him. "I am Carmen Bennett, the woman you married for a shipping route, the woman you leave at home while you sleep with the enemy." Valentino bristled, his Mafia pride flaring. "Camilla has nothing to do with this. The Irish hit us tonight." Carmen let out a short, dark laugh. It was a patronizing sound, and it made Valentino's blood boil. She walked over to the metal table, pulling up a chair opposite him. "The Irish didn't hit you," Valentino Carmen said, leaning forward. "The Irish don't know you're broke. They don't know you're missing $4 million from the union pension funds. They don't know you've been hemorrhaging cash for 6 months. Valentino froze. The bandage slipped from his hand. "How do you know about the union money?" "Only my uncle and my chief accountant know about those accounts. Because I've been reading your ledgers since August," Carmen confessed, her voice utterly devoid of fear. "I broke into your safe. I bypassed the biometric scanner. I audited your entire criminal empire while you were out buying diamonds for Camilla." Valentino stood up the chair, scraping violently against the concrete. His hand instinctively went to his gun, his Mafia paranoia overriding his shock. "You broke into my safe. You're a rat. Did your father put you up to this to take my territory?" Carmen didn't flinch. She looked down the barrel of his gun with absolute boredom. "If I wanted you dead, Valentino, I would have left you under that table at Tavolino's. Sit down and shut up. You're bleeding, your empire is collapsing, and I'm the only one who can fix it." Slowly, almost against his own will, Valentino lowered the weapon. The authority in her voice was intoxicating. It was the voice of a true boss. He sat back down. "Prove it," he demanded. Carmen recited the numbers. She rattled off routing numbers, shell company names, dates, and exact dollar amounts. She traced the $4 million from the construction unions through the Cayman Islands directly into the real estate firm owned by Camilla Sterling's father. "Your Uncle Salvatore engineered the embezzlement," Carmen explained, her eyes locking onto his. "He's stealing your war chest. He tipped off the hitters tonight to take you out, knowing the commission would immediately grant him your seat as underboss out of sympathy for his murdered nephew. And Camilla, she was placed in your bed by her father to keep you blind, deaf, and docile." The betrayal hit Valentino like a physical blow. The uncle who had raised him, the woman he thought he loved, they had treated him like a foolish, easily manipulated pawn. But what shattered his worldview even more was the woman sitting in front of him. "Why are you telling me this now?" Valentino asked, his voice hoarse. "Why save me?" Because Carmen said softly, a dark, dangerous fire lighting up her face. "I am tired of being the punchline. I am tired of the whispers. Salvatore and Camilla think they are the smartest people in New York. I want to watch them burn. And I need your muscle to strike the match." Valentino stared at her. The heavy-set girl in the corner, the woman he had been profoundly embarrassed to call his wife, was the most lethal creature he had ever encountered. She wasn't a liability. She was a weapon of mass destruction. And in that dimly lit warehouse, amidst the smell of blood and damp concrete, Valentino Santoro felt something shift inside him. The disgust and resentment he had harbored for 6 months evaporated, replaced by a dark, consuming obsession. He realized he didn't want the thin, superficial, traitorous Camilla. He wanted the brilliant, ruthless queen sitting across from him. "What's the play?" Carmen Valentino asked, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into a tone of deep, gravelly respect. A cruel, beautiful smile spread across Carmen's lips. "We let Salvatore think he won. We let him think you died in the tunnels tonight. He will call an emergency meeting of the commission tomorrow at noon to claim your seat. And while he is standing before the 5 families, giving a tearful eulogy for his dead nephew." Carmen paused, her eyes gleaming with predatory anticipation. "I am going to bankrupt him. I'm going to drain his offshore accounts, freeze his assets, and send an anonymous encrypted dossier of his embezzlement directly to the other dons. By the time you walk through those doors, very much alive, Salvatore won't just be a traitor. He will be a broke, powerless liability to the entire commission." Valentino felt a shiver run down his spine. It was a masterful, flawless strategy. It was bloodless, yet infinitely more devastating than a bullet. He leaned across the table, his face mere inches from hers. For the first time, he noticed the faint scent of vanilla and gunpowder on her skin. He noticed the sharp intelligence in her dark eyes. And Camilla Valentino whispered. "Leave Camilla to me," Carmen replied smoothly. "I have a very specific lesson to teach her about underestimating the fat girl." Valentino reached out his blood-stained hand, gently cupping Carmen's jaw. She stiffened, unused to his touch, but didn't pull away. "They called you a joke," Valentino murmured, his thumb brushing against her cheek, his eyes dark with a sudden violent possessiveness. "They have no idea. You're the deadliest secret in this city, Mia Regina, my queen. The alliance was struck in the shadows. The underboss and his unseen queen. Tomorrow the Santoro family would be purged in fire, and the underworld would finally learn the terrifying truth about Carmen Bennett. The punchline was over. The rain had begun, The private dining room of the Columbus Citizens Foundation on the Upper East Side was practically vibrating with tension. This was hallowed ground for the 5 families of New York, a place where blood feuds were settled over imported truffles and aged Barolo. Today the mood was distinctly mournful, though the grief was as cheap as a counterfeit Rolex. At the head of the heavy mahogany table sat Don Leonardo, the aging, undisputed head of the commission. Surrounding him were the heads of the other families, their faces carved from stone. And standing at the foot of the table, dabbing his dry eyes with a monogrammed silk handkerchief, was Salvatore Santoro. My nephew Valentino was a hothead. Salvatore said, his voice trembling with practiced sorrow. He was young, reckless, and he let the Irish bait him into a war we weren't prepared for. Last night at Tavolino's, he paid the ultimate price for his arrogance, his body. Well, the fire in the tunnels left nothing to recover. But the Santoro family cannot show weakness. We must stabilize the ports. With a heavy heart, I ask the Commission to formally recognize my succession as boss. Don Leonardo slowly steepled his fingers, the heavy gold of his pinky ring catching the low light. A tragic loss, Sal. Valentino was a capable earner. If what you say is true, we must maintain order. Does anyone here dispute Salvatore's claim to the Santoro throne? Silence hung in the air. Salvatore lowered his handkerchief, a microscopic smirk playing at the corner of his lips. He had done it. He had outsmarted them all. I have a minor dispute, Leonardo. The voice came from the back of the room, cutting through the silence like a gunshot. The heavy oak doors had been opened without a sound. Standing in the threshold, flanked by 2 fiercely loyal capos who had vanished with him the night before, was Valentino Santoro. He wasn't dead. He wasn't even limping. He wore a sharp, charcoal Brioni suit, his jaw set in a line of pure, unadulterated violence. The graze on his arm was hidden beneath the expensive wool, and his dark eyes were locked onto his uncle with the intensity of a predator who had finally cornered its prey. The room erupted. Dons stood up, reaching into their jackets. Salvatore stumbled backward, his face draining of all color, looking as though he had just seen a ghost crawl out of an open grave. The Valentino Salvatore stammered, his voice cracking. "My God, you survived the ambush. Drop the act." Sal Valentino growled, striding toward the table. The armed guards in the room looked to Don Leonardo, who raised a single hand, demanding order. Valentino reached the table and slammed a sleek black tablet onto the polished wood, sliding it directly to the head of the commission. My uncle didn't just survive an ambush. Leonardo Valentino addressed the Don, his voice ringing with authority. He ordered it. He sold out his own blood to steal the family's war chest. Lies. Salvatore shrieked panic, finally cracking his polished veneer. The boy is paranoid. The Irish hit him. Valentino ignored him. He tapped the screen of the tablet. At 8 o'clock this morning, a dossier was sent to all of your private servers. What you are looking at right now is the financial autopsy of Salvatore Santoro. He has been siphoning millions from our construction unions, funneling it through Cayman shell companies, and washing it through a real estate firm owned by Victor Sterling. Don Leonardo put on his reading glasses, scrolling through the impeccably organized digital ledgers. Carmen had not just provided numbers, she had provided an airtight, mathematically flawless narrative of treason. It was beautiful. It was damning. These documents could be forged, Salvatore yelled, sweating profusely. He's trying to usurp me. Check my accounts, I am a loyal earner. Valentino smiled a cold, terrifying expression. Go ahead, Sal. Check your accounts. Check the offshore ones in Geneva. Check the shell corporations in Panama. Check the slush fund you keep at Chase under your wife's maiden name. Salvatore yanked his phone from his breast pocket. His hand shook violently as he opened his encrypted banking applications. The biometric scanner read his face. The loading wheel spun, and then the screen populated. $0. He switched to the Swiss account. 0 Swiss francs. Salvatore stopped breathing. His knees buckled slightly. Every single dime he had stolen, every asset he had hidden, every penny of his legitimate wealth, it was all gone. Wiped clean. Vaporized into the digital ether. How Salvatore whispered, looking at his phone as if it were a bomb. The encryption, the routing numbers. It's impossible. You thought I was just muscle? Uncle Valentino said smoothly, stepping into Salvatore's personal space. You thought you were the only one playing chess. But while you were busy trying to put me in a box, I had an auditor tearing your life apart, down to the copper wiring. Don Leonardo took off his glasses and dropped them onto the tablet. In the Mafia, stealing from the family was a death sentence. But being foolish enough to get caught, bankrupt, and exposed in front of the entire commission, that was a humiliation worse than death. Salvatore Don Leonardo said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, raspy whisper. You are broke. You are a traitor. And you have brought disgrace to this table. You have no seat here. Salvatore fell to his knees. Leonardo, please, Valentino, I raised you. Valentino looked down at the man who had ordered his execution. He felt no pity. He only felt the lingering, intoxicating genius of his wife. Carmen had orchestrated this execution without shedding a single drop of blood. Yet she had completely destroyed a man's soul. Take him to the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Valentino commanded his capos, turning his back on his uncle's sobbing form. And make sure he understands exactly why he's going into the water. As Salvatore was dragged screaming from the room, Don Leonardo poured a glass of Patek Philippe vintage scotch and pushed it across the table toward Valentino. It seems the Santoro family is under new, much smarter management, Leonardo noted, raising his own glass. Who broke his encryptions, Valentino? That level of financial warfare, that requires a ghost. Valentino took the glass. A genuine, dangerous smile touched his lips as he thought of the heavy-set woman sitting in his penthouse, currently holding the strings to a multi-million-dollar empire. Let's just say, Valentino replied, downing the scotch I married well. While Valentino was claiming his throne among the 5 families, Carmen Bennett was tying up the final loose end. The penthouse suite at the Baccarat Hotel and Residences was a monument to new money and bad taste. Mirrored walls, excessive crystal chandeliers, and white leather furniture dominated the space. It was the private sanctuary of Camilla Sterling, paid for entirely by the embezzled Santoro funds. Camilla was sitting on a plush velvet sofa, wearing a silk robe, sipping a mimosa, and scrolling through Instagram. She was waiting for Salvatore to call her with the good news. Valentino was supposed to be dead. Salvatore was supposed to be the new boss, and Camilla was supposed to inherit the role of the city's undisputed Mafia princess. The heavy oak doors of the penthouse didn't just open, they were smoothly unlocked by the electronic master key. Camilla looked up, an annoyed scowl twisting her perfectly contoured face. I told housekeeping to come back, and she froze. Stepping into her pristine white living room was Carmen. She wasn't wearing the baggy apologetic clothing she usually hid in. Carmen wore a sharply tailored, dark emerald trench coat that commanded attention, a pair of black leather gloves, and an expression of absolute terrifying serenity. Camilla blinked, her shock quickly morphing into cruel amusement. She laughed, a high, mocking sound. Well, if it isn't the grieving widow. Did you get lost on the way to the bakery, Carmen? Or did you come here to cry to me about how Vinny finally got what was coming to him? Carmen didn't rise to the bait. She walked slowly across the room, her heels clicking methodically on the imported marble floor. She stopped at a mirrored bar cart, casually picking up a crystal tumbler and examining it in the light. "You have terrible taste in decor," Camilla Carmen said calmly. "Too much glass. It makes the room look cheap." Camilla stood up, her face flushing with anger. "Get the hell out of my apartment, you fat cow! You don't belong here. You never belonged in Valentino's world. You were a joke to him, a joke to all of us." "Your apartment," Carmen echoed, raising an eyebrow. She reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out a folded piece of thick, watermarked paper. She tossed it onto the glass coffee table. "You might want to read that." Camilla glared at her, snatching the paper off the table. As her eyes scanned the legal jargon, her mocking smile slowly dissolved into a mask of pure confusion, then creeping horror. This is a deed of transfer," Camilla stammered, "to the holding company that owns this building." "But my father's firm owns this holding company." "Not anymore," Carmen corrected her, taking off her leather gloves. "At 9 o'clock this morning, your father's real estate firm was subjected to a hostile takeover. It was surprisingly cheap to acquire, considering all of his offshore accounts were mysteriously drained of capital at 3 in the morning. Camilla's hands began to shake. "What did you do? I took back my husband's money," Carmen said, her voice dropping to a lethal, icy register. "And then I used it to buy your father's debt. Which means, Camilla, I own this building. I own the cars in your garage. I own the boutique where you buy your shoes. I own your father. You're lying," Camilla screamed, throwing the paper to the floor. "You're just a stupid fat liability. You couldn't pull this off. Sal is the boss now. Sal will kill you. Salvatore is currently learning how to breathe underwater at the Brooklyn Navy Yard," Carmen stated matter-of-factly. Right on cue, Camilla's phone buzzed violently on the sofa. It wasn't Salvatore. It was a news alert from a financial terminal. Camilla snatched it up, her eyes widening as she read the headline. "Federal authorities raid Sterling Real Estate Group. CIO Victor. Sterling arrested on 47 counts of money, laundering and racketeering." The phone slipped from Camilla's perfectly manicured fingers, clattering onto the marble floor. She looked at Carmen, breathless, her entire reality shattering in real time. "I tipped off the Southern District of New York," Carmen explained pleasantly. "I gave them an encrypted flash drive with every single fraudulent wire transfer your father processed for Salvatore over the last 3 years. The FBI is tearing his offices apart as we speak. He's looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Minimum." Camilla sank to her knees, the silk robe pooling around her. The sheer magnitude of the destruction was incomprehensible. This quiet, heavy-set girl, the one she had mocked, the one she had laughed at with Valentino, had systematically dismantled a multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy before breakfast. Why, Camilla gasped, tears of genuine panic spilling down her cheeks. "Why are you doing this?" Carmen stepped closer, looking down at the beautiful broken woman at her feet. "Because you made the fatal mistake of thinking weight equates to weakness. You thought because I took up space, I was slow, but I was just watching you, all of you, memorizing your flaws." Suddenly the penthouse doors opened again. Valentino walked in, flanked by his men. He looked immaculate, powerful, and utterly terrifying. Camilla let out a sob of relief. She scrambled to her feet and ran toward him. "Vinny, oh God, Vinny, you're alive. Sal lied to me. And this crazy bitch, she's framing my father. She's trying to ruin us. Tell her, Vinny. Tell her to stop." Camilla reached out to grab Valentino's lapels, expecting the man who had shared her bed to protect her. Valentino didn't even blink. He reached out, grabbed Camilla by the throat, and shoved her violently backward. Camilla crashed into the glass coffee table, shattering it, crying out in pain and shock. Valentino didn't look at Camilla. His dark, obsessive gaze bypassed the thin, crying mistress entirely and locked onto Carmen. He walked past the wreckage of the table, stepping right over Camilla, until he stood before his wife. To Camilla's absolute horror, Valentino Santoro, the most ruthless, unyielding man in the New York underworld, bowed his head slightly, reaching out to gently take Carmen's hand. "It's done," Valentino murmured, his voice thick with a reverence he had never shown to another human being. "The commission is ours. Salvatore is gone. You were flawless." Carmen looked at her husband, seeing the raw, predatory loyalty burning in his eyes. She squeezed his hand. "And the sterling problem?" Valentino finally glanced down at Camilla, who was sobbing amidst the broken glass, clutching her bruised shoulder. His eyes held nothing but disgust. "She's nothing," Valentino said coldly. "A parasite. Throw her out on the street. Let her watch her father rot in federal prison from a soup kitchen line." Valentino turned back to Carmen, pulling her firmly against his chest. He kissed her forehead, a public, undeniable declaration of his allegiance. "Come home," Regina Valentino said softly. "Your throne is waiting." As Valentino and Carmen walked out of the penthouse, leaving the ruined, weeping Camilla behind, the message was permanently burned into the annals of the city's history. The Santoro family was no longer ruled by a king alone. It was ruled by a queen who operated in the shadows, a woman whose mind was a weapon sharper than any blade. The fat joke bride was dead. Carmen Santoro had arrived. The winter that followed Salvatore's execution was the coldest New York had seen in decades, but the Santoro syndicate was burning hotter than ever. The transition of power had been utterly merciless. With Carmen operating as the unseen architect, Valentino purged the ranks of anyone still loyal to his dead uncle. He didn't just take the throne, he cemented it with iron and blood. Yet the most profound change was inside the penthouse. The cold, sterile guest suite Valentino used to sleep in had been converted into Carmen's command center, lined with encrypted servers and high-resolution monitors. The master bedroom, once a lonely prison for a neglected bride, was now a sanctuary they shared. Valentino's obsession with Carmen had blossomed into a fierce, consuming devotion. He no longer saw the curves that the high society wives whispered about. He saw the physical embodiment of the woman who held his life, his empire, and his soul in the palm of her hand. But the underworld is a beast that never truly sleeps, and nature abhors a vacuum. While the five families had learned to fear the new Santoro regime, the Irish syndicate on the west side, the very people Salvatore had tried to frame, saw an opportunity. Their boss, Declan O'Rourke, was an old-school brute who believed power was measured exclusively in muscle mass and bullet casings. He had watched the Santoro family bleed money for a year under Salvatore's mismanagement, and despite Valentino's sudden resurgence, Declan was convinced the Italians were overextended. More importantly, Declan had heard the rumors about the new structure of the Santoro family. He heard that Valentino took counsel from his wife. "He's letting a fat, pampered heiress balance his books." Declan scoffed to his lieutenants in a smoke-filled pub in Hell's Kitchen. "Santoro has gone soft. He's whipped by a girl who couldn't outrun a light breeze. We take the Brooklyn Navy Yard tonight, and if he pushes back, we take the wife. She's a walking liability." Declan's fatal mistake was believing the outdated gossip of dead men. It happened on a rainy Tuesday evening. Carmen was returning from a private meeting with the Santoro accountants in Midtown. Her armored SUV was idling at a red light on 10th Avenue when an 18-wheeler deliberately ran the intersection, violently T-boning the vehicle. The impact shattered the bulletproof glass. Before Carmen's dazed security detail could draw their weapons, heavily armed Irish enforcers swarmed the wreckage. They dragged the guards into the street and pulled Carmen from the back seat. They shoved a black hood over her head, threw her into the back of an unmarked van, and sped off into the torrential rain. When Valentino received the phone call, he was at the docks. The phone slipped from his ear, dangling by its cord. His capos watched in silent terror as the color drained from their boss's face, replaced instantly by a wrath so profound it seemed to lower the temperature of the room. "Declan O'Rourke just took my wife," Valentino said, his voice a dead, hollow rasp that promised a massacre. "Arm everyone. If we don't have her back by midnight, I will burn Hell's Kitchen to the bedrock." Meanwhile, inside a soundproofed meatpacking facility in the meatpacking district, Carmen's hood was ripped off. She blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights. She was tied to a metal chair in the center of a killing floor, surrounded by hanging sides of beef. Standing in front of her was Declan O'Rourke, chewing on a wet cigar, flanked by 6 men holding submachine guns. Declan leaned in, blowing smoke into her face, expecting to see a weeping, terrified socialite. Instead, Carmen looked at him with an expression of profound boredom. "So you're the famous joke of a bride," Declan sneered, looking her up and down. "I expected more, or maybe less of you. Listen closely, sweetheart. In about 10 minutes, I'm calling your husband. He's going to sign over the shipping routes to the European cartels, or I'm going to start sending you back to him in very small, very bloody boxes." Carmen didn't flinch. She took a slow breath, inhaling the copper scent of the room, and did what she always did. She analyzed the board. "Declan O'Rourke Carmen," said her voice, smooth and conversational, echoing off the tile walls. "You are currently running 3 illegal casinos in Queens, a gun-running operation through the port of Newark, and you have exactly $12 million buried in a Cayman account under your sister's maiden name." Declan stopped chewing his cigar. The smug smile slid off his face. "How the hell do you know that I know everything?" Carmen replied softly. "And I know that your men are sloppy. When your van hit my car, you thought you captured a liability. You thought you brought a hostage into your fortress." A chilling, predatory smile crept onto Carmen's lips. It was the exact same smile Valentino wore right before he pulled a trigger. "You didn't kidnap a hostage," Declan Carmen whispered. "You brought a Trojan horse through your front door." Declan took a step back, a sudden, inexplicable sliver of fear piercing his bravado. "What are you talking about?" Carmen tilted her head. "Did you really think a woman who dismantled a billionaire's empire before breakfast wouldn't have a contingency plan for a smash-and-grab, check the clasp of my necklace? The emerald one." Declan hesitated, then aggressively stepped forward, yanking the heavy emerald pendant from Carmen's neck. He flipped it over. Embedded in the silver casing was a blinking red microtransponder. It wasn't just a GPS tracker. It was a military-grade localized signal jammer and beacon. It took my husband's men approximately 4 minutes to lock onto that frequency. Carmen checked the gold Rolex on her wrist. "Which means Valentino isn't waiting for your phone call, Declan. He's already here." Right on cue, the reinforced steel doors of the meatpacking facility blew off their hinges. The explosion sent Declan's men flying across the blood-stained floor. Smoke and debris filled the room, and through the haze stepped Valentino Santoro. He was flanked by 20 of his most lethal enforcers, carrying tactical shotguns and assault rifles. Valentino's eyes locked onto Carmen, tied to the chair. Seeing her restrained, seeing another man's hands on her, snapped the last remaining tether of his restraint. "Kill them all!" Valentino roared. The killing floor turned into an absolute slaughterhouse. The Irish syndicate soldiers didn't stand a chance against the highly trained, enraged Santoro hit squad. Gunfire deafened the room, shattering the hanging meat and turning the white tiles crimson. Declan, realizing he had been utterly outplayed, dropped his cigar and lunged for Carmen, pulling a serrated combat knife from his belt. If he was going down, he was taking the Queen with him. He didn't make it 2 steps. Valentino crossed the room with terrifying speed. He tackled the Irish boss, slamming him into the metal grating of the floor. Valentino didn't use a gun. He used his bare hands. He struck Declan with sickening, bone-crunching force, his fists driven by the pure, unadulterated terror of almost losing the woman he loved. "Valentino, stop." The voice was calm, authoritative, and sliced through the ringing silence that followed the gunfire. Valentino froze, his fist raised, dripping with Declan's blood. He looked up, his chest heaving, his eyes wild. Carmen had already freed herself from the zip ties, using a concealed ceramic blade she kept in the lining of her coat. She stood up, brushing a speck of dust from her skirt. She walked over to where Valentino knelt over the broken, gasping Irish boss. Declan looked up at Carmen through a swollen, bloody eye. He finally understood the rumors. He finally understood why the Santoro family was terrifying again. The monster wasn't just the man throwing the punches, it was the woman directing them. "You called me a joke," Carmen said softly, looking down at Declan. "Just like Salvatore did. Just like Camilla did. Let me explain the punchline to you." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her smartphone. She tapped the screen a few times, accessing the secure offshore banking interface she had built. "While you were busy giving your little villain speech, I was using the Wi-Fi in your building to bypass the firewall on your private server," Carmen explained, showing him the screen. "I just transferred the $12 million from your sister's Cayman account into a shell corporation owned by the Santoro family. Your life savings just paid for my ruined armored car. And as for your gun-running routes in Newark, I've already tipped off the ATF. They're raiding your warehouses right now." Declan let out a guttural, wet sob of total defeat. She hadn't just survived him. She had erased his entire legacy in 10 minutes. "Valentino, Carmen," said her voice devoid of mercy. "Finish it." Valentino didn't hesitate. He drew his sidearm and put a single bullet through Declan's head. The war was over before it even began. Valentino stood up, holstering his weapon. He looked around the ruined room, then back to his wife. His hands, still coated in blood, reached out gently, cupping her face. He didn't care about the gore, the smoke, or the dead men at their feet. He crashed his lips against hers in a desperate, bruising kiss that tasted of gunpowder and absolute devotion. Carmen wrapped her arms around his neck, grounding him, pulling the beast back into the cage. "Are you hurt?" Valentino whispered, fiercely against her lips, his thumbs tracing her jawline. "Only my pride," Carmen murmured, leaning into his touch. "He ruined my favorite trench coat." Valentino let out a breathless, dark laugh, his forehead resting against hers. "I'll buy you 100 more. I'll buy you the whole damn city." 3 months later, the commission called another meeting at the Columbus Citizens Foundation. But this time, the seating arrangement was different. Don Leonardo sat at the head, looking older, tireder, and acutely aware of the shifting tides. When the heavy oak doors opened, Valentino Santoro walked in. But he did not walk to his seat alone. By his side walked Carmen. She wore a tailored crimson suit that clung to her curves, a magnificent diamond choker, and an expression of absolute, unchallenged sovereignty. For the first time in the history of the 5 families, a woman pulled out a chair at the main table. There were no whispers. There were no snickers. There was only the heavy, suffocating silence of total respect. The Dons of New York looked at the woman who had bankrupted Salvatore, exiled the Sterlings, and dismantled the Irish syndicate without firing a single shot herself. They looked at the heavy-set girl they had once called the fat joke bride. Carmen folded her hands on the mahogany table, her dark eyes locking with Don Leonardo's. She smiled. "Gentlemen," Carmen said, her voice ringing clear as crystal. "Let's talk business." The joke was over. The Queen had taken the board, and the Mafia world would never be the same again. What a twisted, brilliant ride. Carmen Bennett proved that the most dangerous weapon in the room isn't the loudest gun, but the sharpest mind. She took every insult, every whisper, and every ounce of disrespect, and forged it into an empire, proving that true power doesn't come in a specific size. It comes from intellect, patience, and absolute ruthlessness. Valentino learned the hard way that the fat joke bride was actually the queen he desperately needed. If you loved this story of mafia revenge, tactical genius, and a romance built on blood and loyalty, please hit that like button. It helps the channel grow and brings more stories like this to your screen. Share this video with anyone who loves a brilliant, underestimated heroine who turns the tables on her enemies. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss out on our next dark romance thriller. Who do you think Carmen will destroy next? Let us know in the comments below.